theme of this year is digital singularity. What does that mean to you, and do people are close to digital singularity?
To me, digital singularity is about really capturing what technology can enable us to do is make everything around us smart, and actually taking that first step of implementing that into the various devices that we all use, both in my case, healthcare, medically oriented, as well as everything else that it can enable us to do, and then to capture that data, but most importantly, turn that data into insight, which is, I think, the next big step that's largely hasn't happened yet. And then, of course, the real point of inflection will be is how can you take insight coming from different devices and be able to integrate that into a more holistic view of what's going on with an individual person or an individual factory or an individual whatever, car, automobile, etc. And then have people make much smarter and better decisions off of that kind of data and insight.
And so it used to be that content is king, now data is king, right? When it comes to medicine, data means everything. So what exactly are you doing with that data, and where do you see it going?
Yeah. And probably the change I would make to that statement about data is king, which you hear a lot, is actually, I would say insight is king.
Insight.
Right?
What's the difference?
The difference there is that that a lot of energy has gone into making devices smart, so getting the data, to your point, but not enough energy has gone into how do you turn that data into actual insight. And if you don't have actual insight, so I'll give you a real world example. So now you can do continuous heart rate monitoring, something that has never existed in the history of humanity. For most folks, even in Western societies, you might get your heart rate twice a year when you go to the doctor's office, right? Now you can do that continuously. But what's the so what in that? So unless you have an ability to take that raw data and see how does tracking somebody's heart rate 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, how do you turn that into insight to figure out that there might be an issue and what that issue might be? Unless you can do that insight generation piece with algorithms, machine learning, etc., then the data itself is actually not that valuable. So I would say, insight is king, is where we have to shift our focus to. And then eventually it'll even move beyond that, which is you got to go from insight to how do you actually integrate that into how people make decisions? Because again, you can have an insight, but if it's sitting there on the shelf and it's not how a doctor is actually making a decision or how a consumer or patient is making a decision about their health, then even that insight isn't actually valuable because it's not delivering a behavior change or a clinical therapy change.
I'm interested is the baby boomer generation, right? They need doctors more than anyone right now. There's so many different healthcare facilities opening up. But when it comes to incorporating tech to get to the baby boomers, how does that work? Because it doesn't translate so well. They may or not be fluent. What exactly are we doing with that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of ways to really leverage technology for the baby boomer generation. The first to think about is that actually a lot of them have adapted a lot of technology, as we know, right? Most of them are on Facebook, if nothing else, to keep track of their grandchildren and what they're up to. And they're adapting a lot of other smart technology. So the question is, how do you meet them where they are with that technology, right? So that you don't create something new that they're not familiar with, or create an app that doesn't inherently have the functionality, UX, UI of an app that they're comfortable using, like FaceTime or Facebook or some other things like that. And so I think if you think that way, then you can leverage technology in a meaningful way to bring them access to healthcare. So one example would be a company in my past called Doctor on Demand, which is how do you, instead of going to the clinic, to your physician's office in person or the emergency room or urgent care, within 2 to 3 minutes you can have a discussion with a board certified physician essentially on something that feels and works like FaceTime, right? But it's all a medically compliant platform with board certified physicians that are staffing it. So you're literally talking to a board certified doctor in 2 to 3 minutes from the comfort of anywhere that Doctor on Demand operates in the United States. So that would be a specific example of that. I think the other way you can bring technology to the baby boomer generation is to think about it passively versus actively. So right now, we ask people to do something different just to get that data, i.e. wear this thing, let us do something to directly, go stand on this weight scale, go put on this blood pressure cuff, right? So we're asking people to directly do stuff to get their data. But how do we get maybe not as rich of a data, but as helpful data passively, i.e. how do you censor up their home? So that for example, that this person, their level of activity is changing, or their sleep quality is changing, or other habits are subtly changing. Those may trigger insight around, hey, this person might have something bigger going on or might be deteriorating in some form or fashion. So I think we have to think about how do we passively leverage technology to get that kind of insight to support that generation.